This is the Regular Pastor Podcast, one of very few podcasts devoted to regular pastors serving in regular churches. My name is Landon Coleman. I am a regular pastor at a wonderful church, Emmanuel Baptist Church in Odessa, Texas. This is Season 5 of the Regular Pastor Podcast. In previous seasons, we did a conversation interview format, but here in Season 5, we're talking about books. And we're talking about ideas and how books and their ideas relate to the day-to-day ministry of regular pastors. Today, I want to talk to you about a great book. It is titled Bully Pulpit, Confronting the Problem of Spiritual Abuse in the Church, and the author is Michael Kruger. This book was published by Zondervan in 2022, and if you look at the imprint, it's actually published by Zondervan Reflective, so sort of a niche book within the Zondervan world. This book comes in at 164 pages. The last 17 pages are endnotes, and the format here is sort of a medium format hardcover book. This is really a short book. It's not a long, drawn-out read. There's an introduction, and there is an epilogue at the end, and then there's 7 chapters in the middle. So really you're looking at 7 20-page chapters or so that make up the heart of this book. Let me tell you a little bit about Michael Kruger. He's a legit academic. He is the president and professor of New Testament and Early Christianity at the Charlotte campus of Reformed Theological Seminary. He has a BS from UNC Chapel Hill. He has an MDiv from Westminster in California, and he has a PhD from the University of Edinburgh. In 2019, Kruger was president of the Evangelical Theological Society, and he's one of the inaugural fellows for the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics. Kruger is widely regarded in the academic world as a fantastic scholar. He specializes, at least one of his areas of expertise is the development of the New Testament canon. He's written multiple books. One is called Surviving Religion. We actually gave that book to our high school graduates here at Emmanuel this last year. He's written a book called Christianity at the Crossroads in 2018. That was the Gospel Coalition Book of the Year for history and biography. A couple other books that he's written, The Heresy of Orthodoxy, The Question of the Canon. And this book, Bully Pulpit, the book we're talking about today, was 2022 Book of the Year from Christianity Today and the Gospel Coalition in the category of ministry nonfiction books. So Kruger is well-written, well-respected as an academic. Let's talk about the big idea and the summary of this book. I would turn to the introduction, and this is page Roman numeral 14. Kruger talks about a career of seminary work and a career as a professor and a career as a president. And he says up front that he is more troubled now than he's ever been about the trajectory of our leadership in our theological institutions and in particular in our local churches. Kruger believes that the leaders we're producing and the leaders that we're wanting and the leaders that we're celebrating are marked by many unbiblical characteristics. And he makes a comparison to Israel, who wanted a king. And it wasn't wrong for them to want a king. The problem is they wanted a king like the kings of the other nations. They didn't want a king who would be like Yahweh. And so Kruger is warning us that we've got a leadership problem in our churches and in the institutions that surround our church. If you jump forward to, still in the introduction, but Roman numeral page 16, he acknowledges that most Christian leaders are great. Okay, this is not a problem that impacts all pastors. And Kruger acknowledges that some churches are mean, and they're hard places to lead, hard places to serve. But he also says, you know what? Some pastors are bullies. And so the goal of this book is he wants to help churches and he wants to help ministries and Christians spot abusive leaders and stop abusive leaders. That's the goal of the book. Spot abusive leaders and stop them. So let me share with you a few important ideas that will give you a sense of the flavor of this book. On page 9, Kruger is talking about American culture, and he basically says America loves celebrities. That's true. I've written about that a lot on Regular Pastor, talked about that a lot. Kruger says that this love for celebrity translates to the church, and it translates to the way that we think about leadership. There have always been celebrity pastors. You can go back to ancient Corinth with Paul and Peter and Apollos and all the rest. There's always been celebrity pastors. But our culture is particularly attuned to celebrity, and we are particularly prone to celebrity worship. We give privilege to these people because of their giftedness and their talents. And we elevate giftedness and talent over character. And that's a problem when you're dealing with spiritual leadership, because the Bible prioritizes character over giftedness and over talent. And we've got that upside down. One of the ideas that is helpful in this book is when Kruger actually defines spiritual abuse and lays out what it is and what it's not. It's helpful that he acknowledges in this book that the Bible affirms authority. A lot of books that deal with spiritual abuse, and there are many of them, and there are more of them that continue to come out. A lot of these books reject the idea of biblical authority completely because people have abused that authority. But Kruger doesn't make that mistake. He acknowledges that the Bible affirms authority, good authority, strong authority, clear authority. But he also explains how it is that abusive pastors control people and dominate people. He says you got to watch out for pastors who are hypercritical, pastors who are cruel, pastors who are threatening, pastors who are defensive, pastors who are manipulative. And Kruger's quick to say, not everything that happens in the life of a church or the life of a leader falls under the category of abuse just because it's unpleasant. So unfriendliness is not spiritual abuse. Someone being intimidating, having an intimidating presence, that's not spiritual abuse. Somebody that struggles to get along with others, that's not spiritual abuse. Someone who accidentally hurts another person's feelings, that's not spiritual abuse. Kruger even talks about confronting sin in the lives of church members. That's not spiritual abuse. So he gives you a balanced perspective here, a qualified perspective. Yes, there is authority. Yes, it can be abused. And no, not everything that goes wrong in a church needs to be lumped under this category of spiritual abuse. One last idea that I think is helpful is the how question. And the how question is, how do you prevent spiritual abuse in your church, in your organization, or in your ministry? Most basically, what Kruger is saying is you've got to prioritize character over competency. You have to prioritize teamwork over hierarchy. You need a hierarchy. You need a flow chart. You need clear leadership and authority, but you've got to prioritize teamwork. You also have to prioritize accountability over secrecy. And in church work, there's a place for secrecy. There's a place for being discreet with our information, but there's also got to be accountability, and those are helpful tips in thinking about how you prevent spiritual abuse. You prioritize character, you prioritize teamwork, and you prioritize accountability. Let me give you my favorite quote from the book. I would pull it from page 140, which is toward the back of the book. I write for regular pastors, and I think this is a helpful reminder from Kruger. He says, the job of the shepherd is to care for the sheep. This includes feeding them, protecting them, encouraging them, binding up their wounds, and yes, correcting them when needed. But anyone who makes correction and discipline the main thing is on the pathway to being an abusive pastor. That's a really, really great quote for regular pastors, whether you're many years in ministry or whether you're brand new in ministry. The job of the shepherd is to care for the sheep. Yes, you need to correct people, but when correction and discipline becomes the main thing, more important than caring for the sheep, you're on the pathway to being an abusive pastor. Ministry takeaway around page 134. Kruger talks about the fact that most pastors believe their church, their context, their organization, their ministry is different. And other churches may have these issues, but most pastors tend to think that they've, gotten rid of what he calls pesky weaknesses found in other churches or other organizations. And Kruger says maybe you have, but maybe it's good from time to time to look in the mirror, and maybe it's good from time to time to get feedback from other people who will be honest with you, and people who would be willing to tell you things that you may or may not want to hear. If I had to give any critique or criticism of this book, I would go back to the introduction chapter, and I would just emphasize the fact that sometimes churches are hard to pastors, brutally hard to pastors, their families, their wives, their kids. My experience is that most regular pastors are overworked and underpaid and sorely underappreciated. And so part of me would like to correct Kruger here or critique Kruger and say, you ought to really give it to the churches who can be so difficult on their leaders. But that's not the book he's writing. He's writing to pastors. He's warning pastors about the danger of being bullies, of being guilty of spiritual abuse. And maybe there's another book that needs to be written to warn bully churches or bully boards or bully deacons or bully whatever. There's plenty of that as well, but this book is not written to those individuals. It's written to pastors, and it's a needed book. If you look on Goodreads, this book has a 4.5 star rating out of 5. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I think it's a great read. Who should read it? Pastors. If you're in vocational ministry, I think you ought to read this book. Lay elders at a church, you're the first line of defense for a congregation and for a pastor. And you have to be leading in terms of accountability and watching the character of those who are called to lead your congregation. I think a great group of people to read this book would be pastor search teams who are replacing a bully pastor. And I think that Kruger has some wisdom here when it comes to looking for character over competency. Of course, a pastor search team wants somebody who is competent, who's gifted, who's talented, who has certain skills and abilities. But many times in looking for those things, which are easy to spot, they forget to look for character. And so I think this would be a helpful book for somebody serving on a pastor search team or a pulpit supply team. That's the book, Bully Pulpit, Confronting the Problem of Spiritual Abuse in the Church by Michael J. Kruger. Thanks for listening to the Regular Pastor Podcast. You can subscribe wherever you're listening for weekly episodes here in Season 5. You can follow me online at regularpastor.com, and you can find me on Goodreads if you search for Landon Coleman. Maybe you've got a book that you've written or a book that you would like me to read and review on the podcast. I'd be happy to do that. Send me an email, landon@emmanuelodessa.com. Until next week, this is The Regular Pastor, out.